Good Tuesday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock time for Sports for CLE. Hope your holiday weekend was a good one. Some news again about DeAndre Hopkins, released by the Cardinals on Friday, although it didn't put the paperwork in over the weekend, so it will become official here within the next few hours. Hopkins, again, a favorite target with the Texans of Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson, Kevin Stefanski at the Browns Foundation golf outing today asked about DeAndre Hopkins.
Well, me and D-Hop, we just naturally talk. We've been talking since, the Houston days, and then also whenever he left for Arizona, we were always talking. So, he's always been a brother of mine since I was coming out of high school. Our connection, our relationship has always been great. And I know there's a lot of things swirling around in the media of, him possibly coming to Cleveland. And, for me, my answer to that is, of course, we would love to have him. He knows that. We had a lot of connections, but, it's kind of out of my range of things, of kind of coordinating things. So all I can do is, make a call and see what happens, let AB do the rest.
Yeah, as you know, Jeff, I really like our wide receiver room. I love the guys that are in there. Andrew and his crew are always looking at every avenue and that type of thing. So I won't comment specifically on the player other than to say I really like our roster.
And with that, let's welcome in Fred Greetham, senior reporter for the Orange and Brown Report. And Fred, when Hopkins and Watson played together, they were extremely productive. Now, Hopkins is getting up there in age, but it's an interesting conversation.
Oh, no question. I mean, when I was putting together, we've talked about it, my off-season moves I think the Browns could make. That was kind of led by making a trade like you did for Amari Cooper. And at that time, a lot of talk about what would the Cardinals do with DeAndre Hopkins. He wasn't happy. They looked like they were maybe rebuilding with a new coach. And so, yeah, he would have been, in a trade target. I think that would have been, one of the top of the list. They ended up trading for Elijah Moore. I know why they did. He was also one of the three that I mentioned. Much cheaper, much younger, only in his third year on a rookie contract. So right now, I just have to feel that ship has sailed. The people I've talked to, you're going to, you can put off and restructure, but you got to pay the man sometime. And even you would probably have to move on from Amari Cooper. I mean, he's at $20 million plus, I think, this year. And, you've already got 14, 15 wide receivers. You added 3 wide receivers that probably will be in the top 5 on your roster in Marquise Goodwin, Elijah Moore, and Cedric Tillman. Now, it remains to be seen if Moore will move ahead of Peoples-Jones, but there's only so many dollars. They made some big-time moves, and I think the news also came out today that Hopkins hired a new agency, I think Clutch Sports, based out of Cleveland, I think, or the agent. But he didn't do that to get a minimum wage deal, Yeah, you can structure things, but you have to pay him. There's going to be guaranteed money and so forth now that he's a free agent. It was seems like when you trade for him, you have much more, like you did to Zadarius Smith. You were able to work together, and get the contract deal. Now as a free agent, you kind of go to the highest bidder. And unfortunately, you think that he'll probably end up in the AFC. The Chiefs and the Bills, tried to trade for him. And, you look around the AFC or you look around the NFL, most of the quarterbacks fighting for a Super Bowl are in the AFC. So, yeah, it's a neat connection with Watson and Hopkins. But at this point of the offseason, I think they'd have to make, another drastic move. I don't think you can, I don't know how all the ins and outs of these contracts, but Jack Duffin said there is no way you can do that unless you sign him to a 2-year, $25 million deal and, and something, and then kind of move on from Cooper. but you got guaranteed money there. So it will be interesting, but I don't see it happening. I think he would be great, but you've done a lot, and unfortunately you couldn't work that out earlier in the offseason, in my opinion.
So, as you might expect, a lot of interest in DeAndre Hopkins. Let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Go Browns. Tony Frost, Toledo, Ohio, 50-year Browns fan. I got a quick question. With DeAndre Hopkins being released from Arizona, I have a quick question. If the Browns were to get him, can we sign him to any kind of deal we would agree to, or will we have to pick up his current contract? Go Browns. Woof, woof.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. So, Fred, the contract, once he got released, that contract, it's gone. It wasn't guaranteed. There is a cap hit for the Cardinals, but he is free to negotiate with everybody in the NFL. There was word that the Cardinals didn't put in those release papers yet. So it usually happens at 4 o'clock. It's probably happening as we speak, where he will be officially released by the Cardinals. But he's free to negotiate with anybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like Odell Beckham when he wanted out of Cleveland. They, worked out and gave him his outright release, so he, in effect, became a free agent. And a lot of times these guys would rather be released than traded because they feel like they can go get a deal done. And mention Beckham again, because, in my opinion, the Ravens really overpaid as part of the deal to get Lamar Jackson back and to bring him back to the fold. I think they paid him $18 million for 1 year. I think DeAndre Hopkins, like I said, he hired a new agency today. I don't think he did that to get some team-friendly deal or some non-guaranteed type money. And so, when Beckham gets $18 million, I'd say DeAndre Hopkins has been healthier and much more productive than Beckham in the last few years. So, yeah, I just, again, it's going to be big money, and it's going to come down to who's able to make that deal. Yeah. Sure, you got things working your way with the Browns, with Watson and, and so forth. But I think when it comes down to business, he's probably looking at this, okay, now I'm released. This is probably my last shot, or he gets the 1 year incentive-laden deal. But I think he's going to want, like Zadarius Smith. He wanted to be a free agent after this year, bet on himself, but he still got 11 or 12 million guaranteed this year. So anything can happen. But I just think the Browns have done a lot. And I think we're almost, it almost sounds like getting greedy at this point. You got to be content. You can't do everything. It'd be like Santa Claus, if you had every guy you want. And I said, I thought maybe that window was early in the offseason when the Cardinals wanted to move on from him, trade him, and then you work out a contract and you have him. And now, in effect, he can go wherever he wants, and it's going to be money. And he's also going to look at, chance to get the Super Bowl. And there's going to be some suitors. How could you not be interested in the Chiefs or the Bills? If they were trying to trade for him, they had to feel that they had the money to do something. And so, I think anything can happen, but I wouldn't, when Kevin Stefanski said, I'm happy with the receiver room, I think he's also signaling, they've added three rotation receivers this offseason. Sure, this would be the best of them all. So maybe they feel different, and they might say it's worth going all in and getting him and moving on from Amari Cooper or something like that.
So you do mention Odell Beckham Jr. He kind of was, there's reports that the trade talks between the Chiefs and the Bills stalled when Beckham signed his deal with the Ravens. So the question was put to Tom Pelissero from NFL Network, NFL Media Group. What would it take contract-wise? How could you create a contract that would minimize DeAndre Hopkins' salary? Here's Tom Pelissero.
Teams increasingly, Rich, over the last couple of years have been really aggressive adding void years. So you could do something like, let's use $15 million just as the baseline here. You do a $15 million signing bonus plus $1 million base salary for DeAndre Hopkins. You add 4 void years on top of it. He's on a 1-year, $16 million deal that only counts about $4 million on your cap this year. There's different ways that you can get around this, and I don't think the cap space is the driving force. I think as much as anything, it's opportunity. DeAndre Hopkins is a high-volume type of a player. He is a strong personality, too. Even though he comes across as very laid back, you're going to feel DeAndre Hopkins when he's in the room. He's very talented, but he's been banged up the last couple of years, and he's frankly not as young as he was a few years ago either. So I think it's going to be a fairly short list. Obviously, a lot of teams will poke around on it and see what the market is here. But I would anticipate this is pretty targeted in terms of who's going to be in the DeAndre Hopkins mix, who's going to be willing to pay that type of money to bring in that specific player, not upend kind of the overall dynamic and chemistry of your offense, and have a chance to win right now with him at a time that he's going to want to make sure that he's getting money up front.
Fred, I thought part of that was really interesting was the high volume. I'm not sure that there's enough targets to go around for DeAndre Hopkins when you have Amari Cooper, when you have David Njoku, when you have Elijah Moore, to satisfy him at this point in his career.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think he's the missing piece that would get you the Super Bowl, then by all means get him. But I don't know what you're giving up as far as, like I've said all along, after you drafted Cedric Tillman and you signed Marquise Goodwin and you traded for Elijah Moore, I don't even think you have room for any other wide receivers, barring injury, on this year's roster. So that means you have to move on from one of those top 5 or 6 guys already, like giving up on a David Bell, giving up on a Cedric Tillman for even, get started, or Marquise Goodwin, who you brought in, you liked, or Jakeem Grant. Obviously you got Anthony Schwartz, who you're probably going to move on from. Or do you just say, we'd much rather have a Hopkins over Amari Cooper or Peoples-Jones? Because, yeah, that can bring another set of circumstances. Unless you're winning, and we saw it before. If a high-volume receiver isn't getting his targets, he starts getting, antsy, and it kind of domino effect. We saw that firsthand a couple years ago. So, that's the delicate balance. And that's why I just think at this point of the offseason, I'd be surprised if they went all in to get him in a bidding war, because it's not gonna be say, hey, you want to come in here and play with Deshaun, we'll give you, what do you want, 8-10 million? Yeah, okay. He's gonna say yes. He's gonna get offers from as many teams as he can, and ultimately probably try to get the biggest money and the best opportunity all at the same time.
Fred Greetham from the Orange and Brown Report. Now I'm going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason, get Fred's perspective from OTAs. Sports for CLE. Be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. We continue talking Browns with Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hey, everyone. Our special teams play was below average in most areas and at inopportune times last year. Andrew Berry likes to add and subtract players at a seemingly high rate during the season looking for talent, maybe to a fault. Should he concentrate less on turning over roster spots and keeping unity, more so to allow special teams to gel better and maintain better chemistry? Granted, injuries play a role, but the turnover had to affect special team continuity on some level. Go Browns!
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Fred, I can't argue special teams needed to get better. That's why you got Bubba Ventrone. The other thing that they did is they signed a couple of guys that are primarily special teams guys, which they hadn't done in the past.
Right. As far as that's what I was going to mention is that Ventrone, his voice was, involved in the personnel decisions. They signed a couple of free agents, a linebacker, I think Michael Adams, specifically, a core special teams player. I think a cornerback, Mike Ford, another one. And those guys in the past, the Browns had Tavier Thomas and names like that were on the team, particularly their bottom of the roster guys. But as you say, special teams very important. And the special teams coordinator usually has to just work with what is left, after the cuts in the roster on the offense and the defense. And so it looks to me like the influence of Ventrone with a couple key guys that primarily play special teams, that they really are looking to upgrade that area. And we'll see when they get on the field. But in the early going, talking to the players, they feel that they're going to be aggressive and they're going to be, much better this year in special teams just because of the overall talent. When you keep raising the level of talent on your roster, it spills over that the bottom of the roster guys are usually better players, and that equates to better special teams.
Yeah, and to the question, I don't have a problem with churning the roster over if you're always trying to get better. I think that's kind of what the job of a GM is. But I get the question. You've been out at OTAs. What's your impressions been? Smith, McLeod, Elijah Moore, and just some takeaways from organized team activities that you've been out at.
Obviously, they're not hitting or doing a whole lot, so you really don't know till you get to training camp. But I've said this before, one of the biggest acquisitions to me of the whole, if not the biggest of the whole offseason, was the addition of Jim Schwartz. I think that he will make a big difference in the defense because he has a very aggressive philosophy, and you can see him hands-on out there on the field. Last week, he had a 51 jersey on. We're kind of wondering what that was about. We're going to talk to him at OTAs this week. But Stefanski said basically he likes to pick out a guy who's really doing it the right way. And last week, 51 is Jordan Kunasek. And so I think that, he relates to players, but they respect him. They know he's won the Super Bowl. He's been very experienced, very successful. But I think the biggest thing he brings is an aggressive mindset. And that's really good to know now that when you look out there with Myles Garrett, Zadarius Smith, Obo Okoronkwo, and then Dalvin Tomlinson in the middle and Siaki Ika in the middle and Jordan Elliott. I think they're going to be very aggressive up front. And I just think that it's going to carry over on the field. So Rodney McLeod, I think, was one of the most underrated signings of the offseason. PFF had him ranked 7th best safety in the NFL last year. He's playing for the Colts. He played for the Eagles under Schwartz, I think, when they won the Super Bowl. And the players we were talking to last week, Juan Thornhill said he immediately knows the defense and is telling everybody where to be and what to do. And I just think he's going to be invaluable. We saw some of those defensive blown coverages last year, and you would think with a guy like Thornhill, but McLeod on the back end, will really help the depth as well as, the whole defense. And so I think the safety room with those three guys looks good. But overall, I think those two late additions, Zadarius Smith and Rodney McLeod, will make a big impact on the defense overall. And I thought they'd done a good job in free agency and the draft. But those late two free agent signings, I think would be, have been very, very big. We'll see how it translates. But right now, I think Schwartz and the defense look, and they could really keep them in games early on if the offense struggling, as far as the talent they have and especially coming out of the chute, Schwartz has a track record, but not with the Browns. And so that first game against the Bengals, he can really show them something that maybe Joe Burrow hasn't seen yet with the talent the Browns have, and maybe they can get off to a good start defensively against the Bengals right there.
So this is from the Bleacher Report. Buying or selling the latest buzz, rumors, and off-season workouts. And from the Browns, they are buying Elijah Moore's strong start in Cleveland. Last year, Andrew Berry pulled off a steal when he traded for the then Dallas Cowboys wide receiver Amari Cooper. May have done it again with a deal that brought Elijah Moore to Cleveland. 23-year-old, already established chemistry with Deshaun Watson, according to observers, and Moore himself. Fred, I know you wrote an article on how Moore expects to resume the trajectory of his career here with the Browns. Take us through that and what you think of Elijah Moore. I loved the trade when they made it.
Yeah, those are the type that Andrew Berry looks for, a guy, that maybe is in a situation, for whatever, needs new scenery, but he really liked coming out of the draft. He's only 22 years old. I think he just turned 22 in March. He was drafted high in the second round by the Jets. He got a little he had 4 different quarterbacks, if you remember, in the 2 years he's been there. Last year he had guys like, Mike White and Zach Wilson and Joe Flacco throwing to him. And I think he was a little frustrated with the way he was being used or not being used and fell out of favor, spoke out, and kind of got in the doghouse. And the Browns were able to get him, like you said, for next to nothing. He's still on his rookie contract. And he's a speed guy. He's 4.3 coming out of college at Ole Miss. That's one thing the Browns really lacked, was a speed receiver. I think he felt really wanted by the Browns. And with Deshaun Watson here, I really think that he's going to have a chance, maybe being under the radar behind Cooper and Peoples-Jones and Njoku in the receiving room, that he really could, have a big impact on this offense. And that's why I just say, whether they were to go after Hopkins or not, I think Moore had a good rookie year, showed, where he was heading. His rookies usually have some adjustments, and he still went over 500-600 yards as a rookie. I think he dealt with a little injury, but then last year, like I said, he didn't play a whole lot. And I think he's been here all off season. I think that it's a very high upside with him with very little risk. If he doesn't pan out, you didn't really lose a whole lot. So I think that sky's the limit. It's really up to him. He wants to be here. He feels wanted. And a lot of times that's sometimes the impetus that a player needs to have the confidence to go out there and make plays and get into the offense and play well.
Fred Greetham, senior analyst from the Orange and Brown Report, and I are going to step aside, take one more timeout, other side of the break. We'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason, talk a little bit about Deshaun Watson and the offense. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Fred Greetham, senior analyst from the Orange and Brown Report. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
There's going to be certain people, certain fans, certain Cleveland media members that will never give up on the Baker situation and will always hold the situation with Deshaun Watson against him. I'm just getting frustrated and tired of it. One hurdle we've had in Cleveland is is getting these big-time players to come to Cleveland to play. And finally, we get one, regardless of the situation, and they want to poo-poo on them because of personal vendetta, like the same situation with Myles Garrett. Everyone is not going to be the way you want them to be. Let these players be who they are. And if it results in the win and wins, then that's fine. But quit trying to push people to be somebody that they're not, and let the hating go. Feel how you feel, but at the end of the night, they're people, and we all make mistakes because you're not perfect. I'm sorry, I'm just venting, but love my Browns, go Dog Pound, and again, your show does it the right way.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Fred, the other thing is if you win, really good players want to go and win. So one of the reasons Browns have had trouble attracting the star-level talent is they have struggled since '99. They've struggled.
Yeah, I mean, as far as, Cleveland has never been the destination for like basketball, but what happened during LeBron era, you had all kinds of players wanted to play, with LeBron and Cleveland. I think it's exactly about winning. Now, I haven't heard much about Baker Mayfield, and I don't think there's any question that Deshaun Watson is a superior quarterback to Baker Mayfield. I think the only negative about Watson was the off-field situation, which obviously was big and all that. But the Browns, they were willing to put up with all the ridicule they've went through and give up what they gave up in the draft and everything to make that trade and to pay him the money because they are banking on him being the quarterback that he was in 2018, 2019, 2020 when he led the NFL in passing yards on a bad team. I just think that, he does that and the Browns win, you're not going to hear a whole lot of Baker Mayfield anymore. I mean, Baker Mayfield brought this team and this franchise to the highest of highs since the team returned in '99. But I still think that at his best, he's a middle-of-the-road starting quarterback, maybe above average in the NFL. He is not an elite quarterback. I'm sorry. Deshaun Watson, or 2020 and before, is an elite quarterback. Now, will he return to that? I think he will. But if he doesn't, then the Browns made a major blunder. But if he does what is expected of him, he has the talent. I mean, I've watched him last year before in training camp. I hadn't seen a quarterback that talented on the Browns field in the 30 years I've covered the team. And that includes Brian Sipe and Bernie Kosar, as far as athletically and everything, the whole package. So will he return to what he was before? I think he will. But if he doesn't, But as far as Baker Mayfield, I don't think it had anything personally. He did speak out, and I think the Browns front office didn't say a thing about it. They just moved on from him. But as far as they want to win and they felt to get where they need to go in the AFC, they had to get an elite quarterback. And what are your options? They don't come around very often. The Bengals happened to have the number one pick when Joe Burrow was sitting there. No question he was the number one pick in the draft. The year the Browns had the number one pick, there was supposedly be four of them. Josh Rosen didn't even make it in the league a year or two. Sam Darnold struggled big time. Baker Mayfield has probably been the second best. Josh Allen should have been the pick as we look in hindsight, but he wasn't. And so they saw what Watson did in the past, and they decided this is our chance. We're all in to get him. And they're going to sink or swim this front office on how he plays. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Let's take a look at, this is from the Bleacher Report, stat predictions for every starting quarterback. They say Deshaun Watson, 65% completion rate, 3,732 yards, 28 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 502 rushing yards, and 5 touchdowns. And they say, while Watson looked shaky after making his Browns debut, did throw for 5 TDs, rushed for 75 yards final 2 weeks of the season. Those performances may be a sign of things to come for a Browns player who the Browns gave up so much to acquire. Now, by comparison, Baker Mayfield in 2020, the playoff year, Browns were 11-5. He threw 26 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 35-63 as far as the yardage, 1 rushing touchdown. So, Fred, if the Browns get 28 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 5 rushing touchdowns from Deshaun Watson, how good are they?
Very good. I'd sign up for that right now. And I think he'll throw for 30 or more, but it's the mobility factor. When you can take off with all those wide receivers and tight ends and you can spread the field, what Lamar Jackson's so talented is he can break down that linebacker or that safety that is spying on him, and it's a one-on-one. And anytime a play breaks down, you've got that threat with Watson. And, Baker Mayfield had a great year, but he wasn't really a threat with his legs. And I just think that's the golden ticket. That's why they've made the move. Their running back or their quarterback room is all mobile. They brought in Josh Dobbs, who's a mobile quarterback. They drafted Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who's a mobile quarterback. And they have Kellen Mond also on the roster, similar. So there's no question that's an element of what they want to do. It's just making it all work with Nick Chubb and the running game and out of the shotgun and the pistol and all that. But yeah, I think those numbers would be fantastic. But I just think that would be about. I think he'll do better than that. Actually.
Yeah, and I think they're contenders for the AFC if that happens, and I think they would be. Before I let you go, I know you wrote an article about this. The schedule early, it's tough, but there's some positive. There's opportunities there because of that.
Yeah, I said that because, it's daunting, but you can get out of the chute. The Browns historically have not started fast. I think last year they won on that 58-yard field goal, but that was like the first time. They've only won twice in openers, but they open with the Bengals. That's going to be extremely hard, but an advantage is it'll be Jim Schwartz's first game. Joe Woods was pretty good against the Bengals and Joe Burrow, and I would think Schwartz would game plan similarly to how Woods did, except with the exception, if you remember last year, they lost Higgins and Boyd in the first quarter, and he still stayed in a zone, and they just took that. I mean, he threw the ball, I think, targeted Jamar Chase 20-some times, and the Browns were still in a zone. They didn't even double-team Chase. And I think that Schwartz has been historically one of the most man-to-man defenses in the secondary in the NFL, and I think he'll match him up, and he'll send Zadarius Smith and Myles Garrett and Dalvin Tomlinson, and they'll go all in on Burrow, and they could steal a win right off the gate. And then if you could get out of the gate and win 2 of those 3 AFC North games, you play the Steelers the next week and then the Ravens, and 2 of those 3 are at home. If you could get 2 out of those 3, you have the Titans in there, but you could come out 3-1 and say 2-1 in the division. I think you're setting yourself up big time. If you could go 3-1, but you won the 3 AFC North games, you would be really in good shape, as you enter the second half of the schedule. There's a stretch about 6 games where it's winnable. Overall, they have like the 6th easiest schedule in the NFL if you base it on last year's team's records. So, unfortunately, I think they play playoff teams 3 of their first 5 games, but there's an opportunity then. Go all in to win those first 4 games and then see what happens. If you could come out of those 3-1 even, I think you'd be in great shape. But you can't go 0-3 in the division. 1-2 would be bad. But you wouldn't be out of the hunt. But 2-1 in the division, because I still think the surest way to get the playoffs is win the AFC North, and I think it's winnable, to be honest with you. You know, they were 3-3 last year. Basically, you know, they didn't have Watson the first 3 games. So, hey, you know, go all in right out of the gate. And I put all my eggs in the first game to beat the Bengals. I'd take my chances with Steelers over there. I mean, Monday Night Football, you know, I think that, yeah, they got a great defense, but I think the Browns defense will give Pickett and their offense fits too. So we'll see.
Fred Greetham, as always, appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Fred.
Always a pleasure, Dave.
Fred Greetham, make sure you check him out. Always really good stuff. Senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer and cleveland.com. We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. We continue talking Browns here on Sports4CLE. So DeAndre Hopkins, a free agent, and Tom Pelissero, NFL.com, talked about how Odell Beckham Jr.'s contract that he signed with the Ravens affected Hopkins' thinking.
Arizona had trade talks surrounding DeAndre Hopkins for months. They were not able to move that contract, which would have paid him $19.45 million in 2023, nor was Hopkins willing to rework that contract to the degree that he would have had to facilitate a trade. Now, there was a point, you mentioned Odell, a couple of months ago, where there was momentum toward a Hopkins deal potentially getting done. Then what happens is DeAndre Hopkins sees that Odell Beckham Jr. signs for $15 million fully guaranteed, upside to $18 million. After not playing all of last season, Hopkins then begins to think, well, I can't possibly take less than that. And with that decision went away any chance that they had to move the contract. So at this point, Arizona decided to release him in part because doing it before June 1st allows them just to take the entire bullet now.
And with that, let's welcome in Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Tim, when you hear that he might be looking for 15, 16 million, I mean, there's ways of working around that salary cap wise. I'm not sure that DeAndre Hopkins would be happy in a crowded wide receiver room.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when you look at that kind of value, like if he's looking to get Odell Beckham Jr. money, you're talking up to $18 million for this upcoming season. I think it's going to be interesting how that plays out because obviously the teams are looking at him, the Chiefs and the Bills, Browns, you know, potentially in the mix as well. They're all kind of cap tied in a lot of ways. I mean, there's only so much money you have to go around. And the question is, do you want to pay $18 million, which you might have to for a guy in DeAndre Hopkins that he may not be the same player that he was in Houston. I mean, you look at the numbers, his last 2 seasons, you know, including last year where he missed 6 games with a PED suspension combined for less than 1,300 yards, which when you go compared to the year before, 1,400 yards. So he had 1,400 yards in 2020, less than that in 21 and 22 combined. So he's not the player he was. And it's fair to say that because, I mean, he's in that threshold, that 30 and over threshold, turns 31 on June 6th. So you're looking at a guy who's getting older. He's not a number 1 right now. He's probably a number 2 right now. And the question is, yeah, you may only need him for that season. And if you win the Super Bowl with DeAndre Hopkins, it's worth it in spades. But if you're talking paying $18 million for DeAndre Hopkins, when you don't necessarily know how he kind of fits in your receiver room, or you kind of have to refigure that out over the course of the summer. There's a lot of hoops to kind of go through. Doesn't mean you don't do it, but you have to have a good plan in place for how you incorporate DeAndre Hopkins into your offense.
All right, the most overrated players at each position. This from the Bleacher Report, and this is in the entire league. They say tight end, David Njoku of the Browns. Njoku isn't a bad tight end, but he isn't a great one either. The fact that his contract ranks among the highest at his position just makes no sense. Defensive line, they say Dalvin Tomlinson. He just isn't an impact player. He's a one-dimensional lane clogger who isn't even an elite option at that one dimension. What he is apparently is an excellent salesman because he's convinced at least one of the NFL decision makers that he's more than what he actually is. I would argue that a run stuffer has more value for the Browns, who struggled mightily, historically even, at that. They didn't have anybody that did that, so he's going to be more valuable to the Browns than anybody else, being Tomlinson.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. I mean, the Browns defense had plenty of things going on, talent-wise, but the one thing they were missing was that big 300-plus pound guy who took up blocks in the middle and really made it hard for guards and centers to get to the second level of that defense. And, I mean, you said it, the Browns' rush defense last year wasn't just bad. It was historically bad. I mean, you keep thinking about that Week 4 game in Atlanta where the Falcons pretty much could have told the Browns to run the football straight up the middle. And it was that one drive, I think they did it 9 or 10 times in a row, something like that, every single time, and the Browns simply couldn't stop it. And that was kind of a microcosm of the entire season where they were giving up big rushing performances left and right. So, yeah, you're overpaying in a sense, but I mean, if you're convinced that Dalvin Tomlinson is a missing piece that helps plug in a hole that you desperately need to fill, then it's a price you're willing to pay. I mean, every team is in a sense has a weakness as far as their evaluation goes, where you kind of have to overpay for something else. In this case, it was just, Browns didn't have a run stuffer, and you have to kind of pay a premium to get one in Tomlinson, who's got plenty of experience at doing that.
The other one, Njoku, they got to find a way to get him more involved and make him more of a factor in the passing game. He has the skill set to do it. They just got to find a way to use him to his extent, his fullest extent.
Yeah, I mean, there's been years where we've been kind of talking like, is it time for the breakout year for David Njoku? It feels like we've been talking about that for a while. Came into the league, obviously, he had flashes in his first couple seasons. Then he had 2019 with the problems that he had with Freddie Kitchens. 2020, he was the backup to Austin Hooper. 2021, you had all those issues with Baker Mayfield and the left shoulder. Last season, finally became the number one tight end, but became the number one tight end in an offense that had Jacoby Brissett, and obviously was not going to get as many opportunities throwing the football as you would probably expect the Browns to have this year with Deshaun Watson quarterback. But in a lot of ways, David Njoku is primed to kind of get in that area. I mean, only 26 years old, turns 27 just before training camp. He's a July birthday, so believe it or not, it's kind of crazy. It feels like he's been in the league an extremely long time, but he's only 27 years old, still kind of getting into the prime of his career. Now, it's not going to be easy to get all these targets in this offense because you look at all the weapons the Browns have on offense, what they've added just this year alone. Njoku is obviously the number one tight end in this offense. It's pretty apparent that that's the case. And you would think that if there was a time for him to really break out, it's right now. I think, he's got the ability to have a big season. He just hasn't shown it consistently. But now that he has a quarterback he's worked with before, and, Deshaun Watson expected to play 17 games, this has a good chance for David Njoku to have his best season.
This also from the Bleacher Report. Every NFL team's most exciting 2023 undrafted free agent addition. For the Browns, they go edge rusher Lonnie Phelps from Kansas. Phelps plays a premium position where the Browns need depth, while trading for Zadarius Smith and signing Okoronkwo filled a need for a veteran pass rusher across from Myles Garrett. The Eagles showed us that you can never have too many guys to get after the quarterback. Phelps is interesting, Tim. He's going to have a tough time, earning a spot on the roster because you've got Isaiah Thomas, you've got Alex Wright, you've got Isaiah McGuire. You've got young guys that are draft picks that, everything being equal, the draft picks are going to get a little bit of an extra look.
Yeah, I mean that's the uphill battle every undrafted free agent, has to deal with, because you have to really be special as a UDFA to show a team that you deserve to be around, despite teams having about 260 attempts to draft you, and then all 260 times they say no, and then they go with somebody else. So I think that's the mountain number one that Lonnie Phelps has to climb. Number two, you said it, the edge rusher room is extremely crowded. The addition of Obo Okoronkwo in free agency, the trading for Zadarius Smith, drafting Isaiah McGuire, right there, that's three guys that they've added at edge rusher to go along with Myles Garrett and Alex Wright and Isaiah Thomas. And they obviously need a number 2 and a 3. They've got those two in Smith and Okoronkwo. And I'm not saying Lonnie Phelps is not a bad player. You look at his numbers, the last couple of seasons, put up some good numbers, especially, coming from the MAC in 2021 to Kansas in 2022, 7 sacks, 11.5 tackles for loss. He was the reason Kansas was one of the, feel-good stories of the 2022 season a year ago. And maybe if he sticks around, it's because he's a different body type than they have. He's a smaller guy and only about 240-some pounds. But you look at those athletic numbers that they show, the 40 time, the broad jump, they tell you he's got the ability to have burst off the edge, something that, in a wide 9 you need. If you either need bend or you need burst, and Phelps certainly has that. Maybe he needs to add a little more weight. Maybe he's a practice squad guy, but it's like that article was talking about. You can't have enough pass rushers. This is certainly seems like it's worth the gamble, at least to bring him in, see if you got something, and see if you can really push a guy like Isaiah Thomas and steal a roster spot.
Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com, and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Other side of the break, we'll head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason, plus the Browns' best-kept secret. Sports4CLE, I'll be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer and cleveland.com. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
This is Keith calling from Columbus. Love you guys as always. I'm calling in regards to the Myles Garrett situation, him not showing up to the OTA. My take on it is keep poking the bear, keep rubbing balls wrong. Then you're going to be pissed when he says he wants out of Cleveland. Myles is a generational talent. Who knows? He could not have been there for a school that he injured in the Pro Bowl or what have you. But my point is, relax. Keep poking him, and then he's just going to turn around and say he don't want to be here no more. And we all know we don't want that to happen. So relax. I'm hearing all these talk shows in Cleveland, poking at him. Relax. Thank you, guys. Dog Pound, let's go.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Tim, it's important to note, these OTAs are voluntary. And if you don't think they should be voluntary, the Patriots lost a couple of them because Belichick made them not voluntary.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about the OTAs, they're not meant for guys like Myles Garrett. I mean, there's no contact in these. I mean, they're not wearing full pads. I mean, what are the defensive ends, guys like Myles Garrett, going to do when, he really doesn't need to do anything until, other than keeping his body in shape until training camp when they go to the Greenbrier at the end of July. He doesn't really need to do anything other than keep in shape. I mean, what else, outside of maybe learning the scheme? Yeah, I can understand it in that extent, but that's also what mandatory minicamp is for. They got a couple days for that. And the important thing for the OTAs, I think, is that the offensive guys are there, that Deshaun Watson is there, that the receivers are there, that they get those extra reps, 7-on-7 individual passing drills, so Watson and the receivers can learn each other, so they can kind of understand the timing and all those sorts of things and get that worked out, so that by the time you get to training camp, they have a better understanding of it, and that when the tempo of practice accelerates when it becomes closer to a game, closer to at least a preseason game, and even in those preseason games, they're more ready to go, and that timing isn't as big a concern. As far as poking him and poking the bear as far as, him wanting out of Cleveland. I feel like if he would want out of Cleveland, that'd be more because he doesn't feel the team's ready to win more so than anything. I feel like it's hard for fans to kind of push players out the door, even in the days of social media. If a player like Myles Garrett is going to leave, it's maybe he's one of those guys that believes that he would leave because he doesn't feel that the Browns can win a Super Bowl for whatever reason in the next couple seasons. All
right, this is also from the Bleacher Report. Every NFL team's best-kept secret for the Browns, they go with center Ethan Posick. Carried third highest grade for any center on PFF last year. Posick only gave up 2 sacks all season, was one of the reasons the Browns averaged 4.7 yards a carry. And think about where they might have been if they did not. Underrated job of getting Posick in the offseason by Andrew Berry.
Yeah, and all you need to know about how valuable that move is, look at how different that offensive line was when he was out, when he got injured for those couple games, and Hjalte Froholt was the center. I mean, the middle of that offensive line was just not the same the rest of the season after that. And it's amazing how well he stepped in, and he wasn't necessarily a Pro Bowler, but still played at a very strong level, and I think that was important. With the talent the Browns have on the offensive line, they don't need a Pro Bowler. They don't need a Hall of Fame center. They just need a guy who's solid, and Ethan Posick was pretty solid. And in a way, kind of, takes pressure off Nick Harris, needing him to come back for his ACL. It gives you time to develop Luke Whippler if you believe he can be a starting center for you in a year or two down the road. Obviously, center's not as valuable a position as some of the others on a football field, but anytime you kind of find a sleeper like that, you just go out of nowhere, you find a guy who's a solid contributor. It's always a nice bonus, and especially, if you don't have to pay him a lot of money, considering there's a lot of highly paid players on this roster.
All right, before we go to break, position battles to watch ahead of the 2023 season. This is from the Bleacher Report. For the Browns, wide receiver, there will be a pair of starting jobs up for grabs with Elijah Moore, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Cedric Mullen, Marquise Goodwin, and David Bell in the mix. They also say defensive tackle. One starter in place with Dalvin Tomlinson. As for the other spot, Jordan Elliott, Siaka Ika, Maurice Hurst, Tristan Hill, Perion Winfrey, and then strong side linebacker. Last year, Sione Takitaki collected a career-high 71 tackles, sacked despite playing only 12 games. Because of that, the 27-year-old is the favorite to be the starting strong side linebacker for the Browns. Catches, he's still recovering from a torn ACL that ended his 2022 season. The wide receiver and the defensive tackle are going to be interesting to see as you go through training camp and preseason games.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at wide receiver, you might obviously have a starting three. It makes sense to kind of see who that starting three already is. Probably going to be Mari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and Elijah Moore. It'd be surprised if it wasn't one of those three. And the only reason I think it wouldn't be would be if one of those guys has a long-term injury or whatever. And then after that, you've got, obviously, Marquise Goodwin, you've got Cedric Tillman, you've got David Bell, you've got a bunch of guys behind those top three who could compete for a lot of reps and really try and force themselves into a rotation and give the Browns a lot of options to work with. I mean, last week when I was on with you, we talked about what Elijah Moore said about, how this receiver group has a lot of versatility to it, that there's guys who could beat you in they have different guys who could beat you in different ways, that they don't have, a fleet of speed guys. They don't have like a whole fleet of tall guys. They have a mix of guys, some who do a bunch of different things, and I think that's beneficial. And, when you're looking at defensive tackle, I mean, I think that's the big thing we're going to be looking at is, Dalvin Tomlinson's pretty much, you put that in one in Sharpie as far as one starting job, and then the other one that's going to be so interesting to watch, can Jordan Elliott, how is he going to look next to a bigger defensive tackle? Is he finally ready to step up in the last year of that rookie contract? Will Maurice Hurst be able to be healthy enough to show, that he's talented enough? That health was really the only thing that's kept him from being a viable, solid NFL player. Is Siaki Ika ready to step in as a rookie and have an impact at a position where I've said before that it's so hard for rookies to really have an impact at defensive tackle? So I think those two are going to be so interesting to watch. If nothing else, with receiver again, is just the allocation of reps and how often they go 4 or even 5 guys is going to be interesting. And also defensive tackle, just who wins that second job opposite Dalvin Tomlinson is going to be so interesting.
Tim Bielik and I are going to step aside, take one more time out. Other side of the break, we'll continue talking Browns. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. We continue talking Browns with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer and cleveland.com. This is from CBSSports.com. Reasons for optimism for all of the 18 non-playoff teams in the NFL from last season. For the Browns, passing attack looks deeper a year after leaning heavily on Amari Cooper. The former Texans quarterback, Deshaun Watson, now has ex-Jets prospect Elijah Moore on the outside, along with rookie Cedric Tillman Jr. Veteran speedster Marquise Goodwin is a rotational option. They'll need all the firepower they can get in a tough-nosed AFC North. It's going to be interesting to see, Tim. They're going to transition to a more passing first, at least. I don't know if it's going to be passing heavy, but they're going to throw the ball early more than they did on early downs.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the way the NFL's changed right now. You got to be able to throw early, throw to take the lead, as Greg Olsen says, and then you close the game out with the run. So I think that's what's going to be interesting about this season as far as, with Deshaun Watson's concerned. How much rust did he knock off in those 6 games? I mean, he showed a lot more consistency as far as, the kind of high-level player he could be kind of in those last 2 games, particularly that second half against Washington. Had plenty of moments, I think, in that final game against Pittsburgh, although, the defense, I think, kind of let them down in that game. And if it was closer, I wonder what different things we could have seen from Deshaun Watson in those circumstances. But now that he's got weapons, now that he's got a full year of, playing with Kevin Stefanski, understanding how he works, understanding, his teammates, there should be, I think, a leap going forward. How big of a leap it is, we're not going to know until, he gets a couple games under his belt. But if he comes out against Cincinnati, throws for a couple 100 yards, 3 touchdowns, Browns win that game, I think there should be a lot of optimism, that Deshaun Watson looks like the guy that they gave up all that draft capital to get and paid him all that money to do. He's going to have to, be that guy. May not necessarily need to be the best quarterback in the NFL, but top 5, top 10 at minimum. Certainly what you expect when you give him that kind of guaranteed money.
Yeah, and he was asked if he felt like the rust had been knocked off today at the Golf Foundation outing, and he said, "Yeah, I feel like it, but you're not going to know until you get at game speed, without question. That's the challenge of it." All right, Bleacher Report. Dark horse candidates to be the NFL's biggest award winners in 2023. Offensive Player of the Year, the dark horse, Nick Chubb. With both Kareem Hunt and Dearness Johnson no longer on the team, there's an excellent chance Chubb will see a substantial spike in workload this year. If that bump in carries does come this year, and Chubb manages the same per-touch production that he has throughout his career, Chubb could easily lead the league in rushing. I'm not sure there's going to be a significant bump. It doesn't seem to be in this organization's philosophy to have a guy that you're going to run 25, 30 times a game.
Yeah, I mean, that's why they drafted Jerome Ford a year ago. And obviously we didn't get to see a lot of him because of Kareem Hunt and Dearness Johnson ahead of him on the depth chart. But what you saw at his special teams, what you saw in the limited reps he got in the regular season, what you saw in particular in the preseason, tells you that there's a lot of potential work with Jerome Ford. And with Nick Chubb as well, when it comes to, is he going to get a lot of carries? I mean, we just talked about how we think this offense is probably going to lean a little more on the pass than it has in previous seasons, understandably so, considering who they have a quarterback, who they have a receiver now. This is an offense that should be throwing much more, which means by proxy, fewer carries for Nick Chubb, number one. And also, if you expect Deshaun Watson to get a handful of carries per game, for example, that's also going to take some carries away from Nick Chubb. So that, I think, will hurt him a little bit as far as, how many touches he actually gets this season. But what I think he might lose in that department, he may gain as far as more space to run with. Because if he's running out of shotgun, if he's running out of 4 receiver sets, or 3 receivers and a tight end on a shotgun, all of a sudden with Deshaun Watson a quarterback and who they have receiver, that field will look a little different for him. It'll look a little more wide open in the middle than he's used to, when he's used to seeing 7, 8, or sometimes even 9-man boxes in the middle. All of a sudden it opens up for him, and he's got a little more space to work with along with smaller defenders who will probably have a tougher time tackling him. So I could see him being more efficient, I think, in 2023 more than anything.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think he's going to have more space to run, and his yards per carry, which are pretty good, may even go up because of the ability for the Browns to kind of spread it out and throw the football a little bit. Tim Bielik, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Tim.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Have a good day.
All right, Tim Bielik, make sure you check him out, Plain Dealer as well as cleveland.com. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports4CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports4CLE.